Welcome to Podcetera. Each episode is a journey of discovery as we delve into topics that pique our curiosity and yours. We feature in-depth interviews with fascinating individuals who have extraordinary stories to share.
I'm Renee Lego.
And I'm Joelle Ludovich. And this
is Podcetera. Reverend Irene Monroe, welcome to Podcetera. I'd like to start the episode by getting to know you. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I always tell people I'm a reverend on a good day. I wear numerous hats, one of which is the stuff that reverends do, Christian reverends anyway, on any given Sunday. But I'm also an activist. And my activism is shown a lot, not only in my public speaking, but also in my articles. And how I get to you, lovely folks, is through Out in Jersey, which is a wonderful LGBTQ magazine. And the reason why I have gotten into that aspect of activism is because when I was a doctoral student at Harvard Divinity School, there were two things happening. One was dissertation avoidance behavior, and another was I was writing a sentence a day on it. But I also enjoy writing, and I realized that there was no sense of being a minister that only faced the congregation, the church, and didn't face the world. And facing the world, so many of us LGBTQ people are not in the church for many good reasons. Back in the day when I started in the 80s to today. And so I began writing, and I feel very lucky that Out in Jersey, like many other magazines like The Advocate and others across the country, picked me up. But I was doing something rather intentionally because I always say that my life work is sort of grounded in an intersectional anti-oppression activism and practice. And what I mean by that is as a journalist, I try to inform the public the role really plays in discrimination against LGBTQIA plus people, because homophobia and transphobia is hatred of the other and is usually acted upon in the name of religion. And I try to show, particularly in this era, but I've been doing this for decades, how religious intolerance and fundamentalism not only sort of shatters the goal of American democracy, but it also aids in, I would say, in perpetuating other forms of oppression like, racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism. I mean, that's where you see the interlocking of oppressions. You can't, sort of what Audre Lorde said, we're not a single issue country in terms of dealing with we the people. We have multiple identities, therefore we have multiple oppressions that need to be addressed here. That's pretty much how I got involved. And I come of age as a minister during the AIDS epidemic because there were three questions I asked back in the late 80s, and I'm still asking that in 2024, which is, why can't we, as an African-American community, tell the truth about our sexuality? What price do we pay in telling that truth? And really, what role does the church play in perpetuating not only unsafe, kind of sexual behavior, but continuing sort of, demonizing us and keeping the church itself, not just the people, but the church itself on the down low.
Could you share any personal experiences or pivotal moments that influenced your journey in your advocacy work?
Again, when we say the personal is political, the political is personal here. I'm a child of the Black church for a number of reasons. I mean, I don't have a birth certificate. I was, abandoned in a trash can in Fort Greene Park in Brooklyn, New York, estimated to be 6 months. I get the name Irene Monroe because back in the day, the Catholic Church, all the public orphanages. And so I am named after Sister Irene, who was the head nun of the New York Foundling Hospital. And I always have to joke about this because I'm thinking, what is a nun? Enamored with Marilyn Monroe. But anyway, this is how I get my name and estimated date of birth. So I certainly grew up Catholic first, and then being a ward of New York State and being in various foster homes. And they were Black homes. Then for worship, I'm going to not only Catholic church, but Black church, and then made my decision to stay in the Black church for several reasons. Representation is always important to see myself. Catholic churches I were going to didn't have Black representation like they do more of it now. But the Black church has always functioned as a multiple site. It's family, friends, it's a home for the homeless, parent for the orphan, refuge for the frightened. So I'm a child of, known lineage. And so the Black church gave me a sense of self-esteem. One of the things I know, particularly when you look at any Black church, and I imagine any church, when you're looking at the minister of music and the choir loft, I had come to this realization as I was embracing my sexuality that gay people love Jesus as much as straight people, and that we're not children of a lesser God, but of the same God. And I felt like, particularly in the 80s, there were a number of churches that would have loved to have me, like the Unitarian Universalists, the Episcopal Church, other churches, but I felt like my work really was where the trouble is, which at that time, and still in many ways, is the Black church. At one point, I was the national religious coordinator for the African American Roundtable at the Center for Lesbian Gay Studies and Ministry at the Pacific School of Religion. And the whole idea was trying to help Black churches across the country deal with homophobia in various ways. And it worked for one, at least, I could say, here in the New England area, and the only one really, and that's the Union United Methodist Church. It still is a predominantly African-American church in the South End. And at the time, the South End was a predominantly LGBTQ demographic group before gentrification took place. But it became a reconciling congregation with the help of me helping them help themselves and opening the church to, as we say, all of God's children.
What inspired you to start your podcast, All Revved Up, on WGBH? And what topics do you cover usually?
Well, before the podcast, I was always a guest on Boston Public Radio talking about religion in the news, the intersection of politics and culture. And it became popular, and they put me with this other reverend who's also an African-American minister. You can imagine the fire. And the interesting thing is, which is a wonderful juxtaposition, is that he's younger, I'm the older one, so you would think I'd be the more conservative. He's heterosexual, I'm queer, all of that sort of stuff. And the folks in New England said, we like the Revs. And we got, popular on the radio show where every Monday in the 1 o'clock hour. And then we had the podcast, and one thing grew to another. As you know, in this kind of business, what really drives anything to any kind of success is what the people want to hear. And I've said a few outrageous things, and I think there are gasps that, oh, did that come out of the Rev's mouth?
Well, I look forward to your outrageous thing on our podcast. So I'm waiting for that.
Thank you for the permission.
Not that you needed it. You don't seem like someone who would need that permission.
And getting back to religion, how do you reconcile Pope Francis's progressive remarks on LGBT plus issues, such as his statement, "Who am I to judge?" and his affirmation that God made you like this and he loves you?
You know that in the news today, as we speak, Pope Francis has used the offensive F word for the second time.
Oh, I didn't.
No, he
catch
didn't.
That.
Yes, he did. And it said,
Let's talk about this. When did it happen? And
it was during meetings with priests at our university in Rome. And Francis said again, he said the Vatican there has an air of faggotry. And he went on to say that the meeting was considered private. I need to say that. And the Pope did add that gay men can be, and it's not me doing this, this is how they reported it, good boys, but they shouldn't be led into seminaries. And I need to say this about Pope Francis. I have always said he's the consummate flip-flopper. He makes these, what I would call, left-leaning pronouncements with maintaining that kind of uber-conservative, policy and doctrines, of the church. He double speaks, he sends shockwaves. I mean, when he says, who am I to judge? If we all will remember that, we were like, this is the first time ever, in the history of the Catholic Church, which is many centuries old, to make such a statement. And let me say some of the good things. I need to tell you, as one who does this kind of Pope watch, because I need to say that when he came on, he seemed like, okay, this might be a change, because he has these left-leaning pronouncements. 2023 was his best year in some ways. In 2023, during Catholic Church World Day for the Poor, there's this town just 20 miles south of Rome, and he'd have lunch every month with a community of trans women, and they were sex workers. These are women, these are sisters now, not nuns, but these are sisters who are not closeted about who they are. And they would receive the VIP treatment from the Pope, every month when they would gather. He also called for the decriminalization of homosexuality and should be lauded for that. But at the same time, as he talked about the decriminalization of it, he still says that while homosexuality is not a crime, it is still a sin, Then this is all in 2023 during World Youth Day. He said, that the Vatican has agreed it needs to baptize transgender Catholics and that they're allowed to be godparents. So that was like a really, really good moment here. But as we know, he flip-flops. He'll say one thing and then he'll backpedal. And so the question is, can we really trust the Pope? Because you know that the mea culpa or PR machine is going to come out and say, no, he said it, but he didn't say it. I mean, and yes, it's dealing with himself. And I need to say this, if you don't mind. The Catholic Church is like all churches today, because of your generation, which I say thank you, have embraced issues that is antithetical to a kind of religious orthodoxy. And a lot of it's around women in the church. It's around LGBT people in the church. The Catholic Church have yet to pope, I'm using it as a verb, a person of color, So we have, when I look at your generation, you give me hope. See, I could die with a little peace because I feel that your generation will do what we've never seen. And 2020 was a very good example of that with the George Floyd lynching. I call it a lynching. Some people call it police brutality, but we in the Black community, we know lynching when we see it. But to see how people crossed all sorts of demographic groups of young folks, straight, everybody just out there protesting. And that was a beautiful moment. It gives me hope that your generation will rise to the occasion. Now, my problem with your generation is this. Yeah. Well, I know you got the fervor, the fire, and the brimstone in your marrow to do it. You can't be reactionary. You have to be proactive. And that freedom, all rights, whether it's our rights or women's rights or whatever, we can never be laxed about it. It has to always be going.
I feel like we're closer to your generation.
Yeah, we are.
I'm Gen X.
I'm Gen X.
You might be talking about the millennials and the Gen Zs, but I will say they're very inspirational to me because I definitely wouldn't be doing the things that they were doing when I was their age. And so if there's seeds of change, they're definitely going to come there. And there's people that have been in place in politics way too long that need to move, change seats. We need to change seats way more often.
Amen on that. Yeah.
How did these seemingly contradictory positions impact the church's stance on inclusivity and compassion towards the LGBTQ plus community and individuals?
It doesn't. See, one of the things we have to understand here is that when you don't change policy, then you don't have a systemic change. What you're doing is really, I call window dressing or photo op moments, and they're wonderful. And we will have them in posterity. We like it, but the church maintains the same stance that it did, before he came in office, and I actually thought that he would, with the cardinals, I was thinking that he was going to get more progressive cardinals, but you're reinscribing the same religious orthodoxy. And see, the thing is about religion, it troubles me because, its Latin root means to bind together, to bring people together. And unfortunately, we've seen a backlash because it has brought people together around shared hatred as opposed to varied love and a way we can.
Don't you think there's a shift to the right? Just even there's a religious right that are making that move happen.
Oh yeah, this is what I always say, that the right, the Christian right need to talk to the right Christians. But absolutely, we're very much to the right, and the question is, how did we get there, right? But what happened, if you don't mind me talking about that a bit, but I feel like religion has played an outside role in American politics. Like we've seen the collapse of the church into the affairs of the state, that has given rise to the Christian right, But and I need to say this here is that Christian nationalism is a particular form of Christian heresy. It really is. It really is a cancerous ideology and a political force that, in my opinion, has just metastasized in every aspect of American society, whether it's family, religion, education, it's just all over here. Of course, we know it's upheld by white supremacy using or weaponizing religion. And I just feel like the Christian nationalists, they have no moral bottom. But I need to say that, how is it upheld? Because I need to say this is the first time, I've ever seen a Supreme Court take away rights. I mean, when you look at the civil rights movement, it was a very contentious time. Some has even labeled it as the second Civil War, but we got the Civil Rights Act in 64, the Voting Rights Act 65. I mean, we got to Roe v. Wade. Like, I could have never imagined that being upended. But you got to remember that during the Trump era, the Supreme Court, he put in uber conservative justices that erode our erasures, our civil rights. But he also did this that I thought was that we got to look at very seriously here. He put in about 274 conservative judges, federal judges, that would help overturn Roe v. Wade. Plus, he put 3 conservative justices on the Supreme Court. Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, I got to think of them, Amy Coney Barrett, which all side in overturning Roe v. Wade. So when we're talking about strategy, we also have to think about the Supreme Court too, when we're putting someone in office because they have a lifetime appointment, Supreme Court judges. So in many ways, I feel we're going back in time, and nothing shocked me more than Roe v. Wade. I just have to say I'm shocked, you can tell.
It shocked all of us.
It shocked
A lot of our
everyone.
female population and, progressive thinkers. And I think it just shocked all of us.
So I worry about marriage equality because marriage equality is a baby civil right. That's only 2015. That's only 9 years old. And Massachusetts celebrated 20 years of marriage equality as a state. But it's still,
They're coming for it.
Absolutely. Because
guaranteed.
Thank you. Because if you can overturn Roe v. Wade, you can do anything.
Yep, exactly. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. There are a lot of people in the U.S. are leaving and switching faith traditions in large numbers. Religious churning is what it's called. There was a 2024 survey by the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI. 60% of Americans who are under the age of 30 say that they left because of their religious teaching. 67% who leave a religious faith say that they did so because they simply stopped believing in that religion's teaching, and nearly 47% said that they cited negative teaching about LGBTQ plus people as their reason for leaving.
Yeah, absolutely here. I think there are a couple of things. For a number of reasons, not just LGBTQ people, but some folks have suffered with spiritual abuse, religious trauma, and the Catholic Church has yet to really, in a robust way, address the sex scandal, But yet he'll make pronouncements about other stuff. And I appreciate that the Pope and the Catholic Church very much about what they say, climate change, and part of their theology is preferential option for the poor here. I always say that there has to be a difference between blind obedience and reasoned faith. Then you have to say, well, where do I fit within this religious doctrine as a woman, as an LGBTQ person? So we've seen the religious landscape change for many reasons. We're now seeing many more types of religion. We're not just talking about various forms of Christianity, but of Judaism, Islam, Hindu, Buddhism. So you got that going on. But you got what that younger generation that are 30 and under call nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-E-S, but N-O-N-E-S. And you're absolutely right in many of the social issues. So now, where LGBTQ was one of the issues, plus was the issue, they will now add abortion. They will now add all the other stuff on their litanies of issues that the church is not addressing. See, change comes when you face the world. When you look at who's not included in what we call we the people, and how can religion not hinder you, but help you? It's a kind of indoctrination. My God, should you question anything, particularly in my era growing up, This is back when corporal punishment was allowed. Your parents would beat you if the nuns didn't beat you. I used to call the nuns the thugettes because those girls would beat the hell out of you. I mean, oh my God. Oh, Jesus. Forgive me. But we're a more tolerant, understanding world. We're expanding around this issue. And people have to understand this, that you don't have to be religious to be a good person or a moral person or do the right thing. You don't have to believe in any God. You can be an atheist and be a wonderful person who walks in the world.
What are your thoughts on the potential impact of a reelection of President Trump on the LGBTQ plus community? And what specific concerns or challenges do you foresee for our community rights and protections under another term of his administration?
Well, in some ways, I think
That's okay.
I think it's a rhetorical.
Well, that's a loaded question, Joelle.
It is a loaded question. It's a scary question because I don't want to give voice to what I worry about. But I mean, we have seen the erosion of LGBTQ rights during his first administration. Well, the first time he was in office. They're pandering to a very right-wing audience or mega group. I guess that's how they define themselves. That it affects not just trans folks, because we know that they're the hardest hit. But I mean, we got, oh my God, I mean, let me just say this. The NAACP put out this, telling Black folks, and if you're Black and queer, don't go to Florida. I mean, the Human Rights Commission says, we're in a state of emergency. Oh my goodness, with a Trump presidency, you can see I get so emotional just thinking about that. But I mean, when we just even think about that, there's been to date over 500 bills in 42 states just to ban trans people from bathrooms. And do now remember this, once upon a time, Blacks couldn't use bathrooms and water fountains. Pronouns, sports, gender-affirming surgery, drag queen story hour, that used to be pretty popular even up here in Massachusetts. We're not seeing much of that today. So I just think that with Trump in office, we'll just see more erosion. And I do feel like this. I mean, I think there'll be violence before the election because he's going to court. And I do feel if he doesn't win the election, there'll be violence. If he do win the election, there'll be violence. And coming from his folks. It's just not going to be a good time. But what I try to focus more on, and not this dystopian reality, is how do we get out the vote? And we have a younger generation that feels, and rightly so, they're not great with either candidate. I don't know, how do you get out the vote? Because the question is, they would say, well, who are we voting for? And we know what Trump will do. And I need to say, Joe looks like he's propped up. I mean, oh my God. Yes, he's 80 and Trump is in his 70s. But I know some robust 80-year-olds. I need to say that. But it's it's the kind of 80-year-old gentleman that he is. And I do worry about how his son's problems will interfold with his. We've got the first verdict, which Hunter Biden was found guilty. But that's the first trial. The second trial is in September. And that's when many of us really will be focusing in after the summer vacation. And what interests me is that Trump he gets the indictment.
Well, yeah.
He gets the 34 and then raises about $500 million. You go figure.
Now, do you think it's his sentencing, because he'll be sentenced in July, right? Trump?
July 11th.
July 11th, yeah. Right? Any backlash, any violence?
That's the stuff I worry about. See, that's what I mean when I say I think there'll be violence before the election. I think during the election and even after. I think we're heading into something that is very, very frightening. And we're at a point like, even you can say, well, okay, we'll get the marshals out. You don't know. People are so split. And a lot of them are trained in military. Who would be protecting whom?
That's right.
I mean, just because you are in the military doesn't mean that you're not a Trump person. Well, I shouldn't say it this way. It doesn't mean you won't hold up your office to serve all the people.
Well, we never thought January 6th would be a thing, but it was.
Oh, gosh, yeah, it was.
To that level and that extent, I was just horrified watching it on TV. I never saw anything like that.
None of us did. Actually, it seemed like a movie.
Exactly.
Then I just think about it. God forbid if they got a hold of Pence or Nancy Pelosi, and we already know what has happened to her husband.
Mm-hmm. When I was in film school, we studied Leni Riefenstahl.
Yes. Oh
Leni
boy.
Riefenstahl was one of the most successful filmmakers of her time.
Brilliant in one way.
Very brilliant. So brilliant, she helped create Hitler
That's right.
and spread his doctrine worldwide, right? With those films.
That's right. That's right.
Our modern day Leni Riefenstahls are not as creative, right? We have InfoWars, but I think they are the modern day filmmakers. It's a little bit more dirty. It's how many of those people believe what they're saying? Does it matter because they're making money?
Alex Jones.
Maybe I just didn't want to remember his last name. He's about to be dearly departed with his money, and I couldn't be happier.
What is that other one with his last name is Brandon? See, I can't remember.
I
But
know who
he's
you
going
mean.
to jail. Yeah, he's going to jail. It's a hard time. It helps you to understand Hitler's error in that you think, okay, it was just him, but you got to understand he was able to rise to power because of the people who supported him. You can't do that as a one-man show. You do it because you got people and money and power behind you to support you.
And we also have different ways of distributing that content, right? Which also makes it all the more accessible.
Imagine Hitler with social media.
Oh my God.
That would have been a whole, as bad as World War II was, it would have been a whole other war.
We don't know what the world would be. We would not be here talking about it probably.
Probably not.
Yeah.
So, can you share any success stories or positive experience on LGBTQ inclusion within religious communities that you've witnessed or been a part of?
Listen, one of the things you got to realize, and I appreciate this here, is that while there are some churches that don't refuse to accept us as the body of the church, but there are certain factions. I was at Gene Robinson's consecration, I'll never forget. That was a beautiful moment in the Episcopal Church, but it took a lot to get there. The United Methodist Church has just recently split, and the part that has split, unfortunately, is open and affirming. And, it reminds me again, like when Baptists decided to break away, the Southern Baptists decided to break away from its Confederate brethren, it was open to Black people. Sometimes you have to split in order to move a much larger mass of people forward here. So with the mainline denominational churches, they're in that kind of theological quagmire right now of what to do and how to do it and how to be financially solvent while doing it. See, that's another thing, because a lot of times when you split a church, the people with the bad views hold the most money. That's what happens. They're the ones that put the most money in the coffer to uphold their position here. That's a power grab too within the church. You will certainly be disabused if you didn't think the church was very much about politics. But you also got to realize that there are also other churches. They do what Black folks have done. We have our own churches too. We have Unity, Fellowship. We have Dignity, that's the Catholic group. We have MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, that started back in the 80s. There are ways to worship and stay connected. But the question is, if we're looking for our grandmother's church or our mother's church, no offense, and don't say you heard it from a minister, but it needs to go. It needs to go.
Yeah, I really feel that's true because a lot of that way of thinking is really outdated and not with what's currently going on in society. I feel like religion, politics, they're all kind of out of sync with the people and the progressive, more of the progressive folks, at least. I don't know.
We're not looking for religion, to be quite honest. What we really are looking for is a kind of spiritual community, a spirituality that can embrace us in a way in which religion, with its litanies of do's and don'ts, creeds and doctrines, could never do, because it becomes too more institutionalized. Spirituality to me is like jazz in a way. It has to be fluid. We have a term for it, non-binary, okay? Gender fluid. It really has to. So I think of jazz in that way. It has to move how the people move. It has to have the rhythm and the beat of how the people are moving about in society. So if you can't do that, then you can't do it. It should not maintain itself, a toxic relic that is oppressive.
I think that's where a lot of our issues are coming from. The dissonance between what the people are thinking and experiencing and the outdatedness of the doctrines and the religion and politics. I mean, at least that's how I see it.
I agree with you. Listen, movements have done that. Once you give people their civil rights, you open the world to a beautiful, unified diversity of voices and ideas. And so once we had the women's movement, the LGBT Stonewall riot movements, we're not going back in the closet. They may take our rights, on a legal level. Well, I can't even fit in one. So I ain't even worried about it. I mean, that's it.
Right.
One of our last guests said the same thing. He's not going back in the closet anytime soon, but he is worried about a generation of LGBTQ plus folks who don't know their history and aren't ready to get out there and be activists like there were 55 years ago, right?
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you again, that George Floyd moment was an eye-opener for me. No, I differ, but a little bit. I mean, I understand, but I differ. I just want them to do it sooner than later. See, they're more reactionary than proactive.
Yes.
So
and
the church, the conservative Christian right side is using the church to push people to the right and push these conservative views. The left is not doing the same.
The left has no game.
That's right.
Use those churches to say, hey, you get out there and be an activist. Get out there and fight this. Fight for what you believe in.
That's right. I so agree with you. Well, I so agree with you. First of all, the left, we ain't got no game. That's all I got to say. We got no game. And what bothers me is that when you're hearing about religious voices in the airwaves, it's always conservative. But you have a plethora of progressive, liberal voices. We don't hear those voices. They're not in the public square. And one of the reasons, other than, as I said earlier, engaging in dissertation avoidance behavior and writing a sentence a day, was how do I reach my particular audience? And at the time, it still is the LGBT community. Where are they? And at the time, back in the day, which was before internet, we had these gay rags. You wrote in these papers. Again, if you want to affect, go where the people are because they will tell you what they need. And that's the only way for a church to grow and be open and welcoming. But you're right, the left, that's the only thing I hate being a lefty. We ain't got no game. We ain't got no whoop ass. Okay? So we're going to get our ass whooped,
How do you approach conversations with religious leaders who may hold more conservative views on LGBTQ plus issues? And what strategies have you found effective in fostering understanding and dialogue?
One strategy doesn't fit all. So let me talk about the Black church because that's where I started. And one of the ways in which I got, say, the church down here in the South End is that when I say you meet people where they are, so there are a couple of things. One is this here. For Black people of a certain religious bent, it's always the Bible. Let's read this Bible together. And so in African-American context, we have what is called a canon within a canon because there are some texts within the Bible that are damaging and damning, like the curse of Ham that's saying that Black people are inferior, where Apostle Paul says in the Ephesian text that slaves ought to be obedient to their masters. Now, clearly, if we really read the Bible literally, we'd still be in slavery. So you always got to wonder, how do people use this kind of hermeneutic of suspicion? That resonates, but that doesn't. The Bible also says, it has two creation stories. One says that made humanity equally, and then there's the rib story, that Adam derives from a rib of Adam, and that has been ribbing us in terms of gender inequity even to this day. So with my kind of people, it says, but if you're holding this scripture up, but not this, explain that. Also, with my community, you got to say this, that if we are about liberation, you can't say that if you're gay, you're not Black, or if you're a woman, you're diluting the Black liberation movement by taking a feminist stance. You see, because then what you've set up is a hierarchy of oppression, which is basically maintaining Black patriarchy. See, patriarchy comes in all colors. That's one thing you can always say. That is one of the longest oppressions. I don't care, patriarchy and heteronormativity here. That's one of the oldest oppressions because even though as Black people, we know those two oppressions, along with, of course, racism. So that's what I'm saying. It depends on the particular group, how they have construct their liberation theological canon. And so I can deconstruct that. okay? Because it's just not holding up water here, particularly not just around race, but like I said, we're multiple identities. I'm not just Black, but I'm also female and I'm also a lesbian.
What role do you believe religious institutions should play in promoting LGBTQ plus acceptance and equality, both within their own communities and in society?
You know, I always say that there's a modicum of truth in this stereotype. Usually your minister of music is queer. Usually a lot of the folks on the choir are queer, especially the boys. But also just among your congregants, they got LGBTQI folks in their family. We need to help them liberate themselves so that those folks can feel comfortable just being in that family. So I think that one of the things, like I always say, for particularly Christian churches, we need to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. What exactly is being read there? And how come we use that every time we're talking about homosexuality, calling them sodomites? We need to lift up all of those damaging, like Leviticus, all of those damaging texts, because not to talk about them maintains a normativity about how we interpret it and act it out in life, and we also keep them in the closet. So if we're going to tell the truth, let's tell the truth, or as I say, tell the truth and shame the devil as well as the lie. So I think that's how you move forward.
How do you respond to critics who argue that LGBTQ plus identities are incompatible with religious teachings? And are there ways to reconcile these seemingly divergent perspectives?
Yeah, because basically we got gay ministers, we got gay priests, we got gay nuns. That's why we got to liberate. Okay, we need to talk about sexuality. You know, that our bodies are our temple, sexuality and desire is God given. You need to cloak that in language that is embracing. We need what is happening with our theology. It's an asexual theology as opposed to an embodied sexual, theology. Classic example, the Virgin Mary. Now, you know that don't make no sense on any level. That don't make no sense, really. And then when you become a woman of a certain age, you say, well, how that
Yeah.
happen? How could that happen? How that happen? You know?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you go like, really? Okay. That's why I say you make this distinction between blind obedience and a reasoned faith. Because see, reasoned faith say, well, why is that? Now, what is hidden from the text here? What's hidden from the text here is very simple. Virgin means young woman. Yeah, she could be a young woman and get pregnant. And we all know that Joseph is not the real father. So come on, work with me. It's the way language change over time. For instance, I could say, to one of you that one of you are wearing a bad, shirt today. And depending on how you want to interpret it, you can say, I'm either giving you a compliment or an insult. So again, it's like we got to contextualize how we read the Bible. Why are we using it in this particular way? What is the political advantage to do so or disadvantage?
What role do you think fear plays in religion?
Oh, well, honey, how could you have religion without fear? I mean, that's embedded.
Right. So you're saying like
really.
so and so's gay, the choir's gay, this or that. But there's that resistance of acknowledgement and fear. So how do we move that forward? How do we get beyond the element of fear to have the dialogue, the constructive dialogue?
Well, see, that's where I think that having an embodied theology, because when you have an embodied theology, you're not just talking about queer sexualities, you're talking about everybody's sexualities and desires. And you actually allow yourself to have healthy relationships and tell the truth about who we are, all of who we are. Let me tell you something. So, like I said, every Monday I'm on this show. And so we were doing the segment on the priest. And I can send you the article where Pope Francis said to his nuns and priests and to seminarians, please take your pornography off your phone. Like, really. So you can see the connection between how not only is that an asexual theology, but how pornography will probably play into other ways in which they see not only their own bodies and desires, but then that of others.
Do you think that it stems from the repression, though? Because pornography is sort of an extreme representation of sexuality, I would say.
But that's where a lot of young men today, whether they're straight or gay, are getting their sex education. That's why we need to have a kind of sex education curriculum, even in our churches. But again, if we keep sexuality, no matter whose it is, but sexuality on the down low, then we have a problem. So can I give you a quick question? So back in the day when I was at the div school, our dean had to leave his office immediately because at that time Harvard was updating the computers, the computers. And so, and you can look it up, Dean Ron Thiemann, he had this cache of pornography on his computer and had the audacity to ask the IT office that he needed more room. Okay, so this was the dean of the divinity school. Okay,
Wow.
and you can look it up because it made international news here. So what I'm saying is, and this is a straight man, this is not a gay man. This is a man that is married. You know, I don't know if he wasn't married now, but at that time, certainly. And the question is that we don't have healthy, within religious circles a lot of times, healthy conversations and scriptures to back up that, you know, an embodiedness that will empower us.
There's so many people who are grappling with who they are sexually. And then, he doth protest too much. A lot of
God,
times
Mm-hmm.
in religion, you'll find every
Right.
day there's somebody who is doing conversion therapy and
Absolutely.
doing other things when he's not doing conversion therapy, probably in the closet. So I think bringing it more out into the open and having these healthier conversations so that people can be healthier sexually is not a bad thing to do.
Be their authentic selves. Yeah, whatever that is. Absolutely.
So, mental health is a significant concern for many LGBTQ individuals, particularly those who face rejection or discrimination from religious communities. So, how do you support individuals dealing with these challenges?
I deal with a lot of LGBTQ kids who have either been thrown out of their families or living with their families and dealing with all this toxic theology and are depressed. And there are a couple of things. I always make sure that they understand that there are support systems, that you do not need to battle this by yourself. The wonderful thing I have to say about the internet is that, you know, before the internet, if you needed this kind of literature sent to you, it would have to come almost in a paper bag, you know, and sent through snail mail. Now there are many support systems out there that a person, even in that toxic stew, whether it's the church, their family, or community, can have a supportive community until they figure out how to extricate themselves from that environment. A lot of times they can't because they're kids. They're dependent on their parents. They are children. They're in school. They don't want any more disruption in their life. But we're sending them a lifeline, a lifeline. Hold on. There's a community here.
So, looking ahead, what do you envision as the next steps for advancing LGBTQ plus rights and acceptance within religious contexts? And are there any specific initiatives or strategies you're particularly excited about?
Well, I'm not open about it, but I think it's since Baby Bush, the young Bush, once he was in office, because, when he ran for office, part of his campaign was the whole idea that marriage was between one man and one woman, if you remember, and a lot of the states ratified
That's right.
their state constitutions to enshrine that. But I'm using this as an example because that's when they opened the faith office. And that office was spewing a kind of born again Christianity. And we now to this day still have that because even when Obama was in office, we had a faith office. And it seems like it's not going anyplace, but we need the right people in office that if you're going to, I always feel strongly that there needs to be a separation between church and state, but that's not happening. I do think that you need to put people in place that have varying views about religion in order to have the kind of legislation done on a state level. And then in terms of churches, again, like I say, we hear the Christian right, but we don't hear the left. And we have to be more robust and more active in getting our message across. We're not even good with messaging, and that there's not much we have to do with that. We have various platforms to do it, but we don't. We don't evangelize. See, that's part of a more conservative church background. It's like get the good news out. And the Christian left is just not about that.
What do you think we should be doing as far as getting?
I think more religious voices need to be out in the public sphere more than it needs to be in the church, because that's not where your generation and younger.
The Jerry Falwells, the Billy Grahams.
That's right.
Where are the other ones? Yeah.
That's right. And so that's what I'm saying. And they're in the public sphere. That's where we need to be, more so than in the church, because the message has tentacles. It'll reach further, farther out. We don't have game. But that's where we need to be. It needs to be, we read it in these various papers. We need to use every form of multimedia to get our message out. And it can be done. And I think it'd make a lot of people happier. I know it would certainly make me.
So, as we're winding down our conversation, what do you see as the most pressing issues facing LGBTQ plus individuals within religious contexts, and how would you hope to address them?
Being accepted in the church from the pulpit. I just think you need more progressive ministers in these churches. But the church is dying, so it's kind of hard to talk about the church. Now, we're getting more women in the pulpit, but we just heard the Southern Baptists at one point said they will ban women-led churches. I think they're going to retract that because then they realize they'll have no church, since women of all churches are the backbone of the church.
Who's going to make the cookies?
Okay, you know what? See, there you go. There you go. Absolutely. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I always say, you got to tackle toxic masculinity and patriarchy that is not only out in society, but in the church. The structure, the actual policy, the governance within the church has to go. Could you imagine if we didn't have Pope Francis leading and we had a woman as Pope? It'd just be very different.
But again, I think there's that fear around that whole thing,
With the Catholic Church, there's a lot of money there to be protected.
That's right.
Have you been to the Vatican?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes. Okay.
right.
There's a really expensive painting outside the bathroom. Anywhere in the Vatican, you're just blown away by the amount of money. So it is a nation state.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's right.
They are protecting their wealth and
power.
The Catholic Church has done a lot of things in
it's
history.
An empire. Mm-hmm.
Yes. What advice do you have for LGBTQ plus individuals who may be struggling to reconcile their faith with their identity? And what would you recommend they do if they are?
There are a couple of things I do. Number one, there's a plethora of material online, like affirmations a day that will help them if they're not going to a church particularly. But there are a lot of churches. There's a lot of LGBTQ churches. That kind of helped me when I left the Black church. I needed to for a while before I could go back in and realize what kind of ministry. But I went to Metropolitan Community Church down in the Village. This is in New York City because I'm from New York City and Brooklyn in particular. But I think we have to realize that there are resources out there. And if you're wrestling with your faith, you don't have to do that alone. But I do realize that some people live in more isolated areas, and that's where the internet becomes a marvelous resource. You can just Google and find communities that will certainly help you through this, what I call troubling time, wrestling time.
Thank you for that. Now we're going to move to our more fun questions, I guess you could say. I don't know. A little bit lighter questions. Lighthearted questions. Our speed round segment. So, are you ready, Reverend Irene?
I'm going to do my best. All right.
What is your favorite film or TV show that features LGBTQIA characters?
I would say Pose. This was an American TV drama about the New York City ball culture. This was LGBTQIA subculture within the African American and Latino community during the 1980s and 90s here. And Billy Porter was one of the key actors in that series that a lot of people would know.
What's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
Or scariest, being a Massachusetts driver. Because there's a term now, and I'm not making this up, it's in the Oxford Dictionary because every year they put in new words and it's called masshole. Seriously, that is a word in the Oxford Dictionary.
That's great.
And it's to describe Boston drivers. And I need to say the Boston Globe in 1996 did an article about how terrible mass drivers are.
I'm going to borrow that for New Jersey. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. What's your favorite way to spend a day off?
One of the things I love is romance novels, in particular Black romance, historical Black romance novels. So I have two great authors I read. One is Beverly Jenkins, and she's really the mother or grandmother of Black romance. And then there's this new sister, Alyssa Cole, and her protagonist will be queer, all sorts of along the spectrum here. She's new on the scene, and I'm just enjoying her, Yeah.
If you could listen to only one genre of music for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I think it would be jazz. It's fluid. It's non-binary. I grew up on, of course, gospel. And then during my 20s, my late 20s and 30s, I went to Studio 54. So disco was my jam. And I certainly, even today, when I'm doing my aerobics, I'll have on disco, but I would say jazz.
If you could travel back in time and spend the day with anyone from history, who would you choose?
Gladys Bentley. A lot of folks don't know. I think today we would say she was maybe trans. Back in the day, she was considered a butch dyke. But this was a bold woman in her days, a blues singer. She's known for wearing a white tuxedo. But she did something that a lot of folks that she was just wonderfully and bodaciously outrageous. Back in the day, you could not be openly out, and she was. And she married, what had to be annulled, but she married her lover, which was a white woman. And you don't do that because this is before 1967 with, the Mildred Loving case that dismantled anti-miscegenation laws in this country. And I would just like to say, how you do that? Tell me about that kind of bodaciousness, because I want that to walk through the rest of my life with that kind of boldness.
Do you have any words of scripture or parting thoughts you might want to leave us with?
Matthew 25. What you do for the least of these, you do in terms of moving forward a more multicultural and participatory government. And so I'm hoping that folks will embrace that scripture, Matthew 25, and will get out the vote.
Thank you so much, Reverend Irene, for joining us on Podcetera. It's been great to meet you.
Back at you both. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share Podcetera. And be sure to follow and like the series wherever you enjoy podcasts.
For Podcetera, I'm Renee Lego.
And I'm Joelle Ludovich. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.